These documents all relate to Commonwealth Ombudsman's reports regarding people who are in detention, immigration detention, for prolonged periods of time. And I speak to them. These are immigration issues covered very effectively for the Greens by my colleague Senator McKim, and prior to that also very effectively by Senator Hanson-Young. But I speak to them partly because it has become a bit of a theme for me in the few months since I've been back here of impossible to ignore how ongoing and unresolved some problems are. And this process of these assessments by the Commonwealth Ombudsman under Section 4860 of the Migration Act relate to people who are in prolonged detention. And my memory might be wrong on this, but I'm fairly sure these. I know these occurred and were around when I was in this chamber over 10 years ago, and I think it was put in place as part of a process. Was certainly put in place during the era of the Howard government, in recognition that there were failings in our immigration detention system because people were in detention for very long periods of time, without adequate oversight of their situation, without proper monitoring of whether adequate steps were being taken to resolve their situation. And it might not have directly stemmed from, but it certainly gives me cause to remember the period when former Senator Amanda Vanstone was Immigration Minister, and we had what was a major scandal where an Australian citizen, Vivian Salon, was not only detained but then deported, an Australian deported to the Philippines, and another Australian resident, certainly with a valid visa, Cornelia Rao, was detained for a prolonged period of time in immigration detention, completely unlawfully. And it was sufficiently bad, in conjunction with other things, that the then minister recognised that there was a cultural problem. No, that's the exact words he had. There was a cultural problem in the Immigration Department. Clearly no fault of the government at the time, so it seemed, but a problem in the department with the culture. They put in place various mechanisms to try and ensure it didn't happen again. Well, clearly what we're seeing now is a deliberate application of a culture from the very top down, from the minister, via a horrendous new militarised anti-migration regime under the Home Affairs, following on from the so-called Border Protection Department, now the mega Department of Home Affairs, complete with nice black militaristic-looking uniforms, to deliberately impose a culture of locking people up for as long as possible and causing as much harm as possible. We had a debate in this chamber just yesterday about the inhumanity, the clear, undeniable evidence of massive suffering inflicted on people offshore because of the detention regime, and plenty of independent reports to look at that and to detail that. But it is important to remember that there are still people in Australia right now who are suffering and being made to suffer as part of what I would say is a much deeper cultural problem, and one that has been knowingly created. And it's no surprise that we're now seeing people wrongfully detained yet again as part of that, and a complete lack of care about that fact. To just look at a couple of the cases in here, and they're summarised in the Ombudsman's report. The first couple of people have been in detention for 7 years. So pretty much, we're getting to the stage of all of that period when I was not in this chamber for nearly 10 years. People have been locked up in immigration detention virtually all that time, and still are. And the Ombudsman, of course, doesn't have power to release people. It has a power to make recommendations. And of course the other documents that are tabled as part of this give the minister's or the government's response to the Ombudsman's assessment and the Ombudsman's recommendation. And I think I'm correct in flipping through them all. There's about 18 or so in one report and another 9 in the other, so close to 30 people. Not all of them 7 years or more detained, but all of them very long. There's 100 assessments referring to 135 people who've been in immigration detention for over 2 years. All of the ones, I think, certainly the vast majority, the Ombudsman's recommendation has been ignored. This is the situation we're facing now in our country. This is a deliberate state of affairs being not just perpetrated but continued to be prosecuted with enthusiasm
Senator,
by the
your
current minister.
time
I
has
seek leave to
expired.
continue.
The question is that the motion moved by Senator is leave granted? There being no objection, leave is granted.